bringing Mr. Sunak in as Prime Minister was intended to improve the Conservative electoral fortunes. He was more popular than his party, and it was hoped that would turn things around, as did, in fact, the replacement of Margaret Thatcher by John Major in 1990 before the 1992 election that Mr. Major did indeed manage to win. But it doesn't look as though that trick has worked this time.
Let's turn to the politics of all of this. And those by-election results. Professor John Curtice from the University of Strathclyde joins me. Morning, John.
Good morning to you, Matt.
Sum up in a sentence just how historic, big, significant these two results are.
Well, these are amongst the biggest Conservative to Labour swings in post-war UK electoral history. The swing in particular in Tamworth, just under 24%, is the second biggest swing in that period, and the one in Mid Bedfordshire is also in the top 10. Now, why do we talk about historical records? Well, of course, if we're going to understand the significance of by-elections and crucially not exaggerate their significance, we need to compare by-elections with by-elections. We know that governments will tend to do badly in by-elections and do particularly, perhaps they do even worse than they would do in a general election at the same point in time. And the swing in these by-elections, both of them, is greater than that currently being shown by the opinion polls. But what we can say is, well, when's the last time that we were looking at 20-point swings to the Conservatives, not in the odd by-election, or indeed certainly not to the Liberal Democrats, but to Labour? And the answer to that question is the Parliament of 92 to 97. There were 4 occasions in which there was a swing from Conservative to Labour over 20%. And of course, we know what happened at the end of the 1997 Parliament. There was a very substantial majority for Labour. Now, that doesn't mean to say that history is bound to repeat itself, but it does suggest that we are at present in much the same position as we were 12 months out from the 1997 election, and that therefore the Conservatives have a very substantial mountain to climb, and basically Rishi Sunak has to pull off a trick that John Major was unable to pull off between 1996 and 1997.
We should also note, John, that the situation doesn't really seem to have changed since this time last year. On the anniversary of the day that Liz Truss resigned, nothing that Rishi Sunak has done, being calm and quiet, being slightly more aggressive, announcing policies, not announcing policies, challenging people, culture wars here, bread and butter issues there, top 5 priorities. None of it seems to be making any difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And, a crucial point to make is that, bringing Mr. Sunak in as Prime Minister was intended to improve the Conservative electoral fortunes. He was more popular than his party, and it was hoped that would turn things around, as did, in fact, the replacement of Margaret Thatcher by John Major in 1990 before the 1992 election that Mr. Major did indeed manage to win. But it doesn't look as though that trick has worked this time. Things did improve once Ms. Truss indicated that she was going to resign, but basically the 17-point lead on average in the polls now is pretty much what it has been for most of the last 12 months. And the crucial thing is now we've had the by-elections are now, as we're confirming the evidence. We've had to wait a long time for by-elections in safe Conservative seats. We did have a couple of by-elections in Conservative seats in July, of course. But in one of those in Uxbridge, the Conservatives did relatively well and they hung on to the seat. So we've been asking ever since, well, was Selby the reliable guide or was it Uxbridge? Well, now we know the answer to that question looks as though it was Selby, i.e., and that was another swing of over 20%.
John, always good to speak to you. Really appreciate your time today. John Curtice there from the University of Strathclyde, taking us through those extraordinary election results.